He was one of television's most beloved faces, a man who could make America laugh with nothing more than a raised eyebrow and a confused glance. Art Carney's Ed Norton became the soul of the Honeymooners, the friend every man wanted and the neighbor every wife tolerated. But behind that laughter, something fragile was breaking. When the show ended, Carney walked away from it all, and from one person in particular. No one knew the real reason, not until years later. Long before he was known as Ed Norton, Art Carney was just a shy kid from but privately Mount Vernon, New York, born in 1918. He grew up in a working-class Irish family, one of 6 sons. His childhood wasn't glamorous, but it was filled with the rhythms of radio, the voices, the sound effects, the music that painted pictures in people's minds. He loved the sound of laughter, even before he ever earned it. By the time he was in his 20s, Carney's voice had become his passport. He found early work as a mimic and announcer on radio shows, known for his spot-on impressions of movie stars and politicians. He had a light in him, not the loud, brash kind, but something soft and deeply human. That's what Jackie Gleason saw when they met. It was the early 1950s and television was still a miracle. Gleason was already a force of nature, big, loud, impossible to ignore. He needed a partner who could balance that energy, someone who could take his chaos and turn it into comedy. Carney was perfect. Together they built The Honeymooners, a show about 2 struggling New Yorkers, Ralph Cramden and Ed Norton, who dreamed of more but always ended up exactly where they started. The chemistry between Carney and Gleason was electric. Viewers believed they were real friends because, in a way, they were. Off-screen, Gleason could be demanding, moody, and volatile, but Carney knew how to handle him. He was gentle where Gleason was loud, humble where Gleason was proud. For a time, that balance created magic, but it also built quiet tension. The fame, the pressure, the exhaustion of performing live, it was a strain that neither man would talk about, and for Carney, who had always been more sensitive than people realized, that silence started to grow heavier each year. When the laughter stopped and the stage lights dimmed, Art Carney carried something no one else could see. Before he ever put on Ed Norton's workman's cap, he had worn a soldier's uniform. During World War II, Carney served as an infantryman and a machine gun crewman. In 1944, during the Battle of Normandy, he was hit by shrapnel in his right leg. The injury was severe. The pain never fully left him. For the rest of his life, he walked with a limp, hidden behind the quick steps of comedy. The physical pain was constant, but the unseen wounds ran deeper. The war had changed him. He returned home with a quiet sadness, something heavy behind his kind eyes. He learned to hide it under laughter, to become someone else when the cameras rolled. But when the applause faded, he would retreat into silence, often finding comfort in alcohol. Friends from those years described him as gentle but withdrawn, the kind of man who avoided confrontation at all costs. He wasn't built for Hollywood politics or the rough energy of fame. Even success made him uneasy. When the Honeymooners began, he was catapulted into stardom almost overnight. The whole country adored Ed Norton, yet the man behind him was shrinking under the weight of it all. That pain affected everything: his marriage to his first wife, Jean, his friendships, even his sense of identity. Acting wasn't just a job for him. It was a way to disappear, to be someone lighter, freer, happier. But you can't live like that forever. By the time the Honeymooners hit its stride in 1955, Carney was already struggling with inner conflict. He was grateful for the role, but he also hated the way fame trapped him inside a single image: the funny neighbor, the comic sidekick. Every episode reminded him of how easy it was to make people laugh and how hard it was to make himself feel anything at all. Audrey Meadows saw it. She noticed the sadness in his eyes between takes, the way he'd drift off in thought even while everyone else was joking around. On screen, she was sharp and fearless as Alice Cramden, Ralph's wife. Off screen, She treated Carney with warmth and curiosity. But behind that gentle rapport, a storm was quietly forming, one that would change how they saw each other forever. When The Honeymooners premiered in 1955, it was everything American television needed: laughter, heart, and the kind of working-class humor that felt real. Jackie Gleason's booming charisma as Ralph Cramden, Audrey Meadows' sharp wit as Alice, and Art Carney's oddball charm as Ed Norton formed a perfect trinity. To audiences, they weren't actors. They were family. The chemistry was electric, effortless, the kind that looked born, not rehearsed. But behind that magic, the atmosphere was tense and unpredictable. Jackie Gleason ruled the set like a king. He rarely rehearsed, often rewrote lines at the last minute, and expected everyone else to adapt instantly. Audrey Meadows, a seasoned professional from live television, matched his rhythm with confidence and control. She could deliver sharp comebacks even when the dialogue changed seconds before the cameras rolled. Carney, on the other hand, struggled. He thrived in structure, in preparation, in small spaces where he could perfect every movement. Gleason's chaos unnerved him. While Ralph and Norton's friendship became the emotional core of the show, Carney and Gleason's real relationship was far more complex, mutual respect laced with quiet strain. Gleason admired Carney's genius, but resented how easily the audience adored him. Carney, meanwhile, admired Gleason's boldness, but hated how volatile he could be. And in the middle of that strange dynamic stood Audrey Meadows, smart, composed, diplomatic, balancing two men who couldn't be more different. Crew members recalled that between takes, Gleason would storm around, Meadows would chat calmly with the crew, and Carney would vanish into a corner, silent, polishing his prop hat or humming to himself. He wasn't unfriendly, just unreachable. He did his job, said his lines, and when the cameras stopped, he disappeared. Still, the magic worked. The audience never saw the cracks. Every episode was a masterclass in timing, rhythm, and emotion. The Honeymooners became an instant sensation, earning Carney an Emmy and turning the cast into television royalty. But even then, the silence between them was growing. Audrey admired Carney deeply, but could never quite reach him. She once said in an interview that Art was the gentlest man on the set, but behind those words, there was distance. He was polite, professional, and utterly unknowable. When the curtain fell after the show's short 39-episode run, no one expected that silence to become permanent. Yet for Art Carney, walking away wasn't an accident. It was the only way he knew how to survive. When The Honeymooners ended in 1956, there were no tearful goodbyes, no rap parties, no speeches. Just silence. The show that had made millions laugh ended almost as abruptly as it began, and for Art Carney, it was like closing a door he never wanted to open again. After the final taping, he slipped away quietly. There were no follow-up interviews, no photo ops, no nostalgic tributes. While Jackie Gleason returned to his variety shows and Audrey Meadows moved into films and guest appearances, Carney vanished. To fans, it seemed strange. The man who made America laugh every week had simply disappeared from the frame. But to those who knew him, it was no mystery. He was tired. The fame, the pressure, the noise, it had all taken a toll. Behind the smiles and perfect comedic timing was a man unraveling. The war injuries still haunted him. The anxiety had worsened, and the fame that once lifted him up now felt like a cage. Alcohol became both escape and poison. He wanted peace, not applause. In the early 1960s, that desire for silence became overwhelming. Carney suffered what his family later called an emotional collapse. It was never reported in the press. To the outside world, he was just taking a break. But privately, he was battling depression, drinking heavily, and retreating from everyone who reminded him of his past, including Audrey Meadows. The man who once commanded the stage with laughter now found it difficult to face a room at all. Those who saw him during that time said it was like watching a man fade in slow motion. The sparkle that once lit up television screens had dimmed to a quiet stare. Carney stopped answering calls from old friends, ignored scripts that landed on his doorstep, and spent long evenings alone with a bottle and his memories. Sometimes, he'd sit by the piano, playing the same tune he used to hum on set, until the sound turned into silence. It wasn't self-pity. It was exhaustion, the kind that seeps into a person's bones after years of pretending to be fine. Audrey reached out once, through a mutual friend, sending a short letter. Just a few lines wishing him strength and peace. He never replied. Maybe he didn't know what to say, or maybe he was afraid that opening the door to the past would let all the ghosts back in. Whatever the reason, that small silence between them became permanent, like a sentence neither of them chose but both understood. Yet when he did return to acting years later, it wasn't comedy that saved him. It was drama. His 1974 performance in Harry and Tonto earned him an Academy Award, a role that revealed his quiet genius in a new light. It was tender, heartbreaking, and deeply human. For the first time, audiences saw the real Art Carney, stripped of Ed Norton's goofy grin. But even then, he never looked back. He declined reunion offers, turned down retrospectives, and stayed silent about the Honeymooners. When asked about his time on the show, he gave polite, vague answers. It was a wonderful experience. But that was another time. There was no bitterness in his voice, just finality. Meanwhile, Audrey Meadows continued to speak fondly of him. She often praised his comedic brilliance and kindness, but the warmth was never returned, not out of spite, but out of something deeper, detachment. It was as though Carney had locked that part of his life in a box and thrown away the key. For the fans who adored their chemistry, that silence felt cold, even tragic. But for Carney, it was survival. The laughter that once healed others had stopped healing him. For years after the Honeymooners ended, fans assumed that Art Carney and Audrey Meadows stayed in touch. After all, how could two people who made magic together simply stop talking? But time went on and there were no photos, no phone calls, no public appearances. Nothing. It wasn't a feud, at least not in the way Hollywood usually defines it. There were no harsh words, no betrayals, just distance, quiet, heavy, and final. People who worked on the show said the two had a natural ease together. Audrey respected Carney deeply. She often said that his instincts were unmatched, that he could make a scene sing without saying a word. When she spoke about him in interviews years later, there was admiration, but also something else, a note of sadness. She'd talk about how life was different then, how everyone went their separate ways, and how fame has a strange way of scattering people who once felt like family. Carney, meanwhile, rarely mentioned her name. If he did, it was brief, polite, professional, but distant. Some close to him believed he stayed silent because the Honeymooners represented a time he didn't want to revisit. The pressure, the stage fright, the constant fear of failure, all of it lived in that chapter. Talking about it might have meant reliving it, and Carney wasn't built for nostalgia. He didn't look back. By the 1970s, Audrey had become a beloved television figure in her own right. She appeared in talk shows, sitcoms, and even took roles in That Touch of Mink and Too Close for Comfort. She was warm, witty, and approachable, everything Carney had withdrawn from. When interviewers brought up Art, she would smile softly and say, "He was one of the greats." But she never said more. Maybe she knew he wouldn't want her to. The silence between them stretched into decades. Fans held out hope for a reunion, maybe just one photo or one TV special that could bring the old magic back. But Carney refused every invitation. Even when the Honeymooners celebrated anniversaries on television, he didn't appear. He sent no letters, made no statements. Audrey attended some of those events, often seated beneath posters of her younger self, smiling for cameras, holding back whatever she might have felt about the one person missing. When Audrey Meadows passed away in 1996, tributes poured in from across the country. Her warmth and grace had left a mark. But Carney said nothing publicly. He didn't attend memorials, didn't issue a statement. Those close to him said he mourned privately, quietly, in his own way. It wasn't indifference. It was art being art. A man who once brought the world laughter, yet chose to live out his life in silence. For him, speaking about the past meant reopening old wounds, and perhaps, somewhere deep down, he felt that keeping quiet was his way of honoring it. After all, not every friendship ends in bitterness. Some just fade into the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. By the mid-1980s, Art Carney had almost vanished from the public eye. He'd done a few television movies, a quiet guest role here and there, but the man who once made millions laugh now preferred a life measured in silence, morning walks, and the hum of the ocean outside his Connecticut home. He didn't need applause anymore. He'd had enough of bright lights and loud rooms. He lived in Westbrook, a small coastal town where no one cared about Hollywood or fame. Neighbors saw him as a quiet older man who liked to sit on the porch with his wife, Jean. The two had remarried after 15 years apart. A small miracle in itself. It was a second chance, and Carney cherished it. Away from scripts and cameras, he finally found what he'd been chasing all along. Peace. Even as age caught up with him, he stayed sharp, witty in private, and grateful for the simplicity of his days. But there was always a sense that something remained unresolved, a kind of unfinished melody from his past. He never wrote a memoir, never gave the tell-all interviews that Hollywood expected. When asked once if he missed acting, he simply said, "No. I've said what I needed to say." That was all. His old injury from the war had started to trouble him again, and years of smoking didn't help his health. But he never complained. He'd been through worse, real war, real pain, real loss. So he faced aging the same way he faced fame, quietly. By the early 2000s, Art Carney was almost completely withdrawn. No appearances, no red carpets, no reunions. When he passed away peacefully in his sleep on November 9th, 2003, there were no grand tributes, no televised memorials, just a few short obituaries and old reruns of the Honeymooners still playing on late-night TV. Jackie Gleason had died years earlier in 1987. Audrey Meadows was gone by 1996. Joyce Randolph, the last of the four, once said in an interview, "Art was a joy to work with. There was no one like him." And that was how people remembered him, not through headlines or scandals, but through laughter that still felt timeless. To millions of fans, he was still Ed Norton, the lovable, bumbling friend with the big heart. But those who looked closer saw a man shaped by war, wounded by fame, and softened by time. He didn't need to be remembered for the noise he made, but for the quiet grace with which he carried his pain. And maybe that's why he never called Audrey Meadows, never attended a reunion, never looked back. The silence wasn't anger. It was peace. After a lifetime of laughter, Art Carney had finally earned the right to rest in quiet. What do you think really kept Art Carney and Audrey Meadows apart all those years? Was it pain, pride, or simply time? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you'd like to uncover more hidden stories behind Hollywood's brightest smiles, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more untold histories.